and he's talking and he's given a tour of the future. It's wonderful. All the human problems have been solved. You know, everybody's wealthy. No environmental problems. But everybody's frowning and kind of glum and kind of looking over their shoulder. And finally, he turns to his guy and says, "Why is this?" And the guy says, "You don't understand. We have real problems." And when I look at the past, really, we do have real problems right now. Existential, we face existential threats. On the other hand, we faced existential threats before. And when I thought about the past, there was really very, very little that I could. Your question is, what is it that I miss most? Well, I miss people who died that were my friends. Old age or accidents and stuff like that. So that's a real thing. But that's kind of nature as we have been stuck with it in the past. So that's one thing I miss. I miss what it was like before the War on Terror. Of course, that's balanced by we had a greater apprehension of certain other existential threats, but those are still around, so I do miss what it was like before the War on Terror. I miss what it was like before the self-inflicted wound that is the war on drugs. But, those are all, I really don't know of things that I especially miss. There are things I'm nostalgic for, and I think there are things that were good, but I was really surprised when I started thinking about that question.
All right. So a couple of questions came in about another of your novels, A Deepness in the Sky. And I'm going to read just a quick quote. Some of the most significant aspects of the new medium are yet to be recognized. There may not be hypertext sequels so much as instantiation of new windows on the reality of the story. Group participation during both the initial construction and in expanding the ongoing reality may be one of the most striking features of the art form. So we're talking about collaborative storytelling and hypertext. Have you seen anything that approaches this now as we move more into the HTML era?
The flavors of this that I'm seeing, it's something I am watching with great interest. I think there are some aspects that are going like this. It's certainly the flavor of it is the truth of what has happened. It has a different sort of a flavor than I think what is directly implied by those words. Now, games and game design, that's the clearest place that is like this. Eve, E-V-E. That probably comes to the closest that I'm aware of for interactive participation in very large scale.
Massive space battles.
Yes.
Sort of things happening.
If there were a lot of that going on right now, I would say yes. Point to this Yes, it's clearly happening. On the other hand, the sort of collaboration that went into Wikipedia, which is certainly not a direction that I expected. And if somebody asked me in 1995 about the Wikipedia idea, I said, don't you know how many bad people there are around that like to kick good things down just because they can kick them down? I'm still amazed at that survives and that it works so well. And in a way, it gives me hope for the whole human race, because it may just be that the griefers and the people who like to destroy things just because they're good, that they are a sufficient minority, that the very bright majority can actually win the day, even in the face of technology that is so empowering.
Also from Deepness in the Sky, also about hypertext, you describe it as an entirely new art form. And you say that you believe it would be as different from novels as motion pictures are from oil paintings. How do you deal with an object like that as an information professional? How do you describe that, or catalog it, or store it, or how does that work? Do you have any ideas?
I think that it goes back to whether you can put a scope on it or not. If it's going to expand at the rate and that data storage available, then it's going to remain permanently beyond your, capability for any sort of classical organization. But to the extent that it actually is a bounded corpus, I think that it can be kept track of. It's a much bigger thing than organizing, single books or something like that. But I think it can be done. I think, in fact, it's going to explode beyond all but the simplest taxonomical description. In either Rainbow's End or in the prequel novella, Fast Times at Claremont High, I make the remark, which I'm not sure is true considering what the astronomers are doing, but I make the remark that in the end, the amount of fiction that we're storing is much larger than the amount of nonfiction, and this is sort of in line with the enthusiasm that you point to that I had about hypertext. That in the end, if we ever got invaded by aliens, if they weren't careful and didn't understand the distinction, they might look at our writing, our science, and not realize it was science fiction and flee in horror.
All right. So one of the most interesting things about Rainbow's End for me personally, as I read it, were kind of two aspects of the communities, the emergent communities, both the kind of shared visual identity that they had, and the entire concept of a belief circle, and the fact that you could effectively, as your reputation grew, you became more powerful, and things like this. So do you see, it made me think about our current kind of online world and things like 4chan and Anonymous and Reddit and some of the hacktivism that has been going on in the last couple of months. Do you see an overlap between these? It was not incredibly apparent to me, but it seemed like they were flavors of the same sort of idea.
Yes, I think that the belief circle stuff in Rainbow's End is an aspect of, is a trend that we're seeing in our present, and it is very, very much like what it went to in Rainbow's End. I didn't talk about it in the talk, but in the bibliography for the talk, let me point to several things.
Sure.
Bruce Sterling had a story called Maneki, which does a super good job of showing how powerful a belief circle type thing could be. It's not quite clear whether it's a belief circle or whether there's more machine involvement or not, but it really doesn't matter. The thing is, if you're in this sort of private club, and this is different from now. In fact, I think nowadays, when we talk about social networking, it's a very top-down, commercially driven thing. But if you had the software provided, say, with copyleft, you could have bottom-up social networking, or top-down, but it's not clear where the top is. And another of the references in the bibliography is to a talk where I talk about belief circles and lifestyle cults. That's the more pejorative term for the same thing. And I give a taxonomy for them. And right now, this is a hypothetical taxonomy, since many of the categories I talk about do not exist now. But you could imagine a bottom-up one where if you're a member of the club and you're walking along, the system that you're part of, it's not being driven by some advertiser up here. It's being driven by your peers. If you want to buy something, that data is generated from within the peers, and it trickles up and may eventually reach a commercial entity that says, oh, you want cell phones that are built into walking canes. We can do that. They never would have thought of doing that before, but if it came from this group. Similarly, and slightly more ominously, other people don't need to know that you're in the club. And so you might find you're walking down the street, and the little voice in your head, in your ear, says, the next person you see on your right, give them the stick of chewing gum that you have in your pocket. Or give them the box of matches that you have in your pocket. And that's it. And so you do that. The flip side of that, or the side that affects you, is it's like you're living in a bubble of good luck. Wherever you go, what you need at that moment just sort of suddenly materializes. And in Maneki Neko, it's actually a lighthearted and funny story about some people that, it's not quite what they're doing, but it's very offensive to the US government.
Yeah.
And the CIA has chased them into Tokyo. And they're wandering around Tokyo, but they're part of this sort of organization. And it's just like they have unending good luck. And the CIA agents that are after them have unending bad luck. And nobody gets killed, but at the end of the story, the CIA agents are being carted off by the Japanese police for some offense, like jaywalking or, some total, not fabrication, but just everything that went wrong for them as tourists came out. They're going off to jail, and our hero and stuff, they're continuing to do whatever it is that they're doing.
That's actually very similar. We're familiar with the story, but the Daniel Suarez's book Damon.
Oh.
Very, very similar in that there's a coordination via VR of a number of people that need to get something done. None of them know anything about it. They don't know what the end result is, but they just happen to run into each other.
And how lighthearted is that?
Very
Yes.
lighthearted. Very dark.
And this actually shows that contention and controversy in the future is what sort of government regulation would there or could there be against such things? Because you could easily make a case that's extraordinarily dangerous. And on the other hand, shutting it down would be extraordinarily draconian.
Very undemocratic. Yeah, the concept of the users developing talking to the corporations upstream is almost antithetical to the traditional cyberpunk ethos, where the corporations are being imposition upon the populace. Right. That's a really interesting.
And so far there isn't actually. So far the power of the people has been manifested by the net, but it hasn't been manifested in this sort of direct, organized way that we're talking about here, which would be very interesting. The whole thing that I can see with the social networks that I see it talked about is it's extremely top-down, and it's basically a money-making machine, and you spend most of your time complaining about how you're being abused by whatever it is, their crazy rules that are just intended to sort of lock you in.
Yeah, the only instance where I'm aware of online where that sort of collaborative, you're surfing for ideas and then someone's producing them for you on the upstream is done for advertising, which is not something that most people really want to interact with. So, a couple more library questions that have come in from people online, and then we'll get to questions here in the audience here in just a second. One of the things that really drives, especially public libraries, but a lot of libraries now, is the whole concept of the digital divide and the lack of uniformity of technology, right, across both class and rural areas and that sort of thing. Libraries become technology hubs because it's the most cost-effective way to deal with that divide. So speculate a little bit for us as to what you think the digital divide might look like a couple of decades from now.
I think it's going to be sort of a moving line, and I think also that the natural fall in price per performance of these devices, plus the fact that human beings are very good at seeing when devices and behaviors are beneficial, will work to make for a pull of technology into poor areas rather than the push. In the 20th century, I think that the notion was of pushing the benefits of technology into poor areas. To me, 20 to 2010 showed that there's an enormous potential for pull if the devices get to be cheap enough. And in addition to an additional aspect to that it goes beyond just my chief reaction, which is just wow to look at the penetration of cell phones, is that cell phones depend on a lot of infrastructure. And it is just amazing how that infrastructure has sprouted up in the most unlikely places. Just to see a headline that says, Taliban forbids use of cell phones, or else it'll bomb the towers. It says, what? What? You mean there are towers in those areas, and they're not bombing them? And then stepping back from the violent aspect of it, as I understand it, there are places in the world where the financing of the towers itself is extraordinarily creative, where you actually get competing vendors who will chip in for the same tower, who will collaboratively finance the same tower. And that there are places in some of the cases, these are in countries you would never, where the government is not exactly aligned with the notion of open communication or freedom. But there are some really important places where I think the regulation for putting up towers is significantly less than it is here. The rules for what the hoops you have to jump through to put through the towers. So, at least as a libertarian, my dream would be that we'll see this very surprising effect where when this stuff gets cheap enough and usable enough. Cell phones are already usable enough that they are an enormous win, whether or not you can read and write. That when that happens, there is going to be another tipping point, and we'll be in a situation where, except for where people are actually starving or really under the threat of disease or being shot at, continuously, that except for regions like that there's really going to be a takeoff. Now, plug that in with other sort of environmental issues. I mean, we could get environmental situations that also are gobbling up areas of territory and making it go the other way.
Yeah, the entry in the areas getting shot at, disease and stuff. Even there, entry level technology is starting to become such that again, cell phones, and you've seen stories about bicycle power generators to make sure that the cell phones are recharged and things like this. The technology is getting out. Where I think libraries can is, of course, the technologies, that is always the lowest level of technology. And there's always a higher level of technologies in the parlance of Rainbow's End. Certain people might use laptops, but libraries really want to be using wearables, So there's still a gap between expectation and deliverance, depending on your level of skill and affordability. So, just very interesting. So, let's see if there's another couple. What's some easy technology that that either you use or you've seen that you think can help libraries stand out in the next several years? Where do you think libraries can really show some technology chops, so to speak?
Working on these interfaces and making them usable to people is certainly one. I think that the championing rational, legitimate uses of copyright and opposing illegitimate uses of copyright is really extremely important. And I think it is in line. It is actually it is a proper part of the answer to that. There's another science fiction writer who's occasionally at the ALA, Eric Flint, who's written a lot about copyright, and he's in a position, as with myself, where we make money out of the fact that there is a copyright. But there is a reason for copyrights, and it's not to make money for me in particular. It's to make it possible for people to make a living by creating things that other people might want. And that has gotten entirely, I don't like to talk about conspiracies, but it has gotten entirely out of hand. You see this across the board with technology, that when the technology of the last 20 or 30 years has shown up, you got the reaction as, oh my God, this could destroy my business model. And in some cases, it's more broadly stated than business model. It's sort of like, my reason for existence, and they've convinced you previously that their reason for existence is really, really important to you.
Yes.
Okay. In the case of copyright, the issue is, oh my God, all this digital stuff means that unless we put in some really strict rules about copyright and have DRM tagged on everything, it's going to be the end of the world. All these wonderful things that copyright has given us. And their argue is the technology has meant that the ground rules have changed, and so we need some new laws. Now, this happens in every area. It happens in national security. It happens in freedom of speech issues. It happens in copyright. But in the back of their mind, they're also looking to say, my God, with a DRM, I could be paid 1/1000th of a cent every time somebody's eyeball sweeps across a certain, a certain target.
Yep.
This is the biggest win that I have ever imagined. So that is the cargo that's coming along behind their overt statement that they want to protect the status quo.
Yep.
So actually, Eric Flynn has written several essays about this, and right now, I think they're temporarily, inaccessible, so you won't find them on my bibliography list. But so have people like Cory Doctorow, and getting this straight and at least not going back, to less accessibility. We are in a position now where we can, if we can get the legal things settled, and overall, my hat is off to, Writers Guild and Google. I don't like that. I have things about the agreement I don't like, but I really think that the extreme, holding all of this in and getting the draconian laws for DRM and all of this, I don't think that can stick. So basically, I guess the dystopia that I'm talking about is not that we'll have a situation where they can make that stick, but they will get a situation where we can have Drug Wars 3 over. Oh my God, you have you've subverted DRM on that object, and we really want to avoid things like that. And I think the librarians actually are a respected voice there, that they aren't. They don't quite have the vested interest that I see with the certain other parties.
Yeah, it's a big challenge right now for libraries that we're in the midst of this digital transition, where in the past our model has been the ability to use the first sale principle, right? We buy a physical object and we can lend it to people. First sale goes away with digital objects. With a digital object, you're legally bound to whatever license you can get the publisher to agree to. And as you said, getting that 1/1000th of a cent every time someone checks out the book, rather than paying once and lending forever, is a huge different model for us. And as we move into the digital world, it's one that is going to be just incredibly challenging, I think, for libraries.
To me, one rule of thumb is anytime you look at a proposed roll of actions, if it means you have to give up the Bill of Rights to make it work, that means that whatever else is nice about it, it's not
It's a no-go from the beginning. Yeah. Well, we've got just a few minutes left in the time. Do we have any questions from the audience here? We've had quite a few from online. Yeah, please.
Yes, going back to the idea of boundaries with physical objects or whatever the book form is in, versus having access to across all these things and finding information. One thing that always bothered me about that concept is that you lose context. And I wonder if you have any comments about that. In other words, if you are searching for something, you know what I mean, and you get this quote that says something, it may not really have anything to do with what the context of the book was about.
Yes. Yeah, I think that is a very serious problem that's naturally avoided when you got the physical boundary there. And if I were writing dystopias, I could make some kind of cool dystopias there that it'd be possible to have people completely misled about things. And for that matter, if there were partitions, in other words, if you do have this stuff all wrapped up in automation and things like that, you can get situations, and we see this on the web right now, where if you feel like it, you can arrange things so that you never see stuff that disagrees with your point of view. You just see self-reinforcing stuff forever. And if a person wants to behave like that, if a user wants to behave like that, I don't think there's any way of stopping them, but I think that should be a principle of epistemology that is recognized by users, that there is a point in being able to look at things that aren't your particular opinion, and you should go after that. As far as the situation with the context and unintentional misleading because of that. I do not have any particular policy thing that I can think of, or better yet, any technological invention that would guide it that way. I think that ongoing, that's going to be something that we're stuck with. It also, you might run into people who would claim that getting that right is actually equivalent to having something like intelligence in the system, a singularity issue. Something that can actually look at the context and say, no, that's not what this guy really means. To get that right very often means you're talking about something that's really at least as smart as a person. And we may get that, but that's over the singularity horizon.
Other questions? No. Stella? All right. Excellent.
As you were speaking of the singularity, I thought back to Pete Piper's story of the cosmic computer, where they find the all-knowing computer. It turns out that the finding of the use of it leads to societal destruction. It requires that the society isn't ready. That society wasn't prepared to manage to openly use that kind of thing. I was wondering how, if you see connections kind of somehow with as we expand our knowledge, is our society expanding or used to appropriately use, I guess, the singularities that comes, thinking back to Piper's example. I don't know if you're familiar.
Right now, I'm drawing a blank on Piper's story. I've actually read a lot of his stuff, and I'm drawing a blank on that particular story. Frame the question again.
Well, in the story, they're out seeking the Merlin, the kind of computer that knows everything, and when they find it, they look at it. If we use it, what happens? It causes society to collapse because everybody reacts the way people would react to its use. Actually causes a collapse in society rather than the safety they thought it would. So they end up lying. So using it, not telling anybody, but society was incapable of managing, I guess, the use of that kind of computing thing in that society.
So. Personally, I do not believe that I do not believe that actually is a threat. I think what we've seen in the years, the sort of situation that you described for the story there, I think was one that was fairly common in the 1950s, where the notion of something that was so much smarter than we that there were certain absolute things about it. And to me, what the last 50, 60 years, I think, have made us, I don't know, more humble or more arrogant about the nature of problems and the nature of solutions of problems. That it's very unlikely that we would run into anything that would be willing to talk to us in this oracular sense and be this accurate. I think it is true that if you had something that could not be wrong under any circumstances, and that was generally agreed, that can cause all sorts of problems. Actually, even whether or not it can really be wrong. Robert Wilson, I think, had a story about a guy in the future who convinced the people in the past that he could never be wrong. And it just destroyed civilization. In fact, this may be exactly the sort of environment that you're talking about. And in the end, the thing that brought him down was some people realized that it was the fact that he was never wrong. And the reason he was never wrong was he actually was coming from the future, and he had a few things right, and he just made sure that, he concentrated on those. And as soon as it was shown that this sort of mathematical certainty that he could never be wrong, as soon as that was shown that that was not literally true, it didn't matter how right he was about everything else, his game plan for destroying civilization went away. So I think any level of imperfection on the part of the cosmic computer would destroy the negative that Piper is talking about. That is just an intuition on my part.
Good afternoon. I have a question about retaining things that have been digitized, historical things. The Ithaca 2009 report recommends keep it for 30 years because politically, now you would be in trouble if you destroyed it after you digitized it. But after 30 years, you should put into your plan that you will destroy the original. And you said you wanted librarians to save our libraries from burning, but we really need help because corporate America is saying, oh yes, digitize and toss. You'll have recorded it, you'll have retained it, you'll preserve it forever.
30 years gets us close to the singularity. So.
First of all, if it's paper that you own, like if it's a company and it's paper that they own, then I think my answer would be different. If they wanted to burn it, then they might have trouble with the government and various, there's various laws about company secrecy. But basically, if it's your property, that's one issue. I took the first part of your question to be about more general library holdings type thing.
History.
Pardon?
History.
Oh, history. Okay, like government documents.
No, like 500-year-old books.
Oh, okay.
400-year-old
Right.
books, 300-year-old books.
Actually, I see, for the same reason that I disagree with Schlemann's attitude toward Troy, that there is an absolute necessity. You don't know what it is about the object. It may be the type of glue that they used in the binding.
The age carbon dating.
Yeah, there's,
says something about
right.
the dark age.
So that I really agree with that. Now, so the question is not whether to save it or not, but how many instances have to be saved? Because they may use a different type. There may be some guy who wants to do a latitudinal study of the glues that's used in these bindings. So this guy wants all the copies. And it may be okay for the astronomers to try to digitize the entire universe, but when you get some guy saying that he wants to keep physical copies of every physical object that was ever done and not digitize it, that's impossible.
Digitize it, but then destroy it.
Oh, no, I'm saying this guy wants to keep the physical copies because there's issues about, we don't know about the glue, we don't know about the fingerprints. And I'm saying, yes, we do want to keep copies for those purposes. We do not have the physical ability to entertain the Collier brother extreme of keeping every copy that was ever made of the document.
You need like a statistical sampling or something.
It's an issue where to draw the line.
Yeah,
If you have the money to
Yeah.
save all the copies of all the telephone books that were used in New York, that were ever printed and still survive, I say go for it, but you're probably not getting enough money to do that.
We
Yeah,
already
and
have the dinosaur record, though. We already have only surviving copies. We don't have all the copies.
Right,
Yeah.
By nature.
and as time goes on, though, that the total body of that gets bigger. So, as with an individual human, there comes a time when you have to decide: can you keep hold of everything? And exactly where you make the cut, I certainly don't have the answer to. And actually, I would say the answer should be partly resource based. It should be, you have the money to do this. But as far as keeping physical copies, I see a very good reason for keeping as much physical copies as you can, for the reason that you don't know what it is you're going to look for. I do see a distinction, though. The people who made, here's a type of distinction. Go back to the person who made the document. The intellectual reason why they made the document, that's usually a very much smaller number of bytes. That's the irreducible minimum when it comes to digitization. So in the case of the telephone book, you really would like to have a digitized copy of what they thought was important about the telephone book, which includes all the advertising, of course. And beyond that, beyond what the original intellectual intent of it was, then things become, I become hazier and more, but the original intellectual intent, that should be actually the bottom standard for digitization. Anybody who doesn't want to digitize down to that level, for instance, I have a great book at home, but they didn't digitize I have a digital copy of a great book at home, but they didn't digitize the pictures legibly, the diagrams legibly. So that violates my floor, because it does not meet the intellectual purpose of the originator.
Google didn't do that, they didn't do the.
They didn't do the pictures? Okay, that does not meet the floor, and so certainly, so I'm sorry for reiterating this because I've actually just thought of it, but there is a distinction between keeping things because you don't know what people will want later, and keeping things to capture what the intellectual purpose was originally.
Sure.
That provides a very objective, a relatively objective standard that should be fiercely defended.
But yeah, the first example there are literally an infinite number of things that might be interesting about any particular object.
Yeah.
Maybe you want the DNA from the saliva of the person that thumbed the page. There's an infinite number of things that might be interesting, but yeah, your floor of it needs to be representative of the intention of the information is certainly a good one.
Well,
One more, let's close
well,
out.
actually, it builds off of what you just said right there. As we're talking about books or materials after they're digitized, you still want to keep the original copy because there might be some sort of informational value to it that can be determined later on. What happens when we get to the part where technology, you can throw a book into a wood chipper and then it gets automatized or something and you can analyze every single atom of said material, then is it necessary to keep it?
Yeah, if you
Actually, though, I think I hear an assumption there not an assumption, an assertion that if it ever came up that I would dispute, and that is the assertion that you have identified what is the lowest, that there is no possibility.
I don't mean to make that type of assertion.
Right, so that would prevent me from going along with that. By the way, in Rainbow's End, the apologists for the shredders said that in fact they were, forget the digitization for a moment. They said, in fact, what we're doing is saving the books because after we're done with them, those shreds will be stored in an inert atmosphere. And they will be available to archaeologists forever and ever. So in fact, we're being friendly. You should thank us. And the people who were saying that were sneering because they figured that was just a total.
Well, you also just mentioned another part, we don't know what the smallest delineation of matter can possibly be. Is it possible to keep something around long enough to eventually investigate it to that possible smallest?
Yes.
So wouldn't it be better just to get what you can get now instead of waiting?
Actually, the archaeologists have finally faced up to this. I mean, for years and years and years, archaeologists sneered at grave robbers, and then they finally realized they were the outstanding example of grave robbers. And so nowadays, you'll actually find archaeology digs that do partials. And the notion is they say, well, we know that we don't know what we could find here. So we're going to try to respond to your point that you can't wait forever. We want to find what we can find, but we're going to leave something for when people regard us as grave robbers.
All right. Well, thank you all, and thank And this session was recorded. It will be available on LeaderBlog if you want to pass it along to friends. And thank you guys. Have a great conference.
Thank you. Not that I believe that hot mics really go away.
No, you shouldn't. No.
Oh, and here is my thing.
So much.
some of Eric's